The procedure officer set his folder on Diep's warm kitchen table. If an inspection comes and your workshop papers aren't updated, it becomes trouble. Banana jam simmered. Nye clutched her stuffed orange, and James was at the office while his mother texted, 2 more days. One missing form could shake their income and their peace. But Diep stayed calm, took copies and said, "Tell me what you need." Have you ever kept a home warm while paperwork threatened the outside? Like and subscribe for steady family stories. In a healing home, cold weather isn't just temperature, it's a test. Will the day turn into stress, or will someone build warmth on purpose? The cold hit early, sharp enough that even the kitchen felt like it needed a plan. Diep fed the stove first, listened for the crackle, and waited until the heat finally pushed back. Then she lined bananas on the counter like a small project. "Banana jam," she said, half to herself, "and banana bread to sell. If people want something sweet, we give them something clean." Niai sat on a small chair, the stuffed orange tucked under her arm, watching like quality control. Me lay near the stove, tail thumping softly when anyone walked past. "You sit still," Diep reminded. "Warm first." Nai nodded. The word mom still came carefully these days, never demanded, only allowed to arrive. Because the jam needed time, Diep built a study corner at the table. "Books," she said, tapping the wood. "Alphabet first." Nee dragged her books over and read out loud in a serious, dramatic voice. "Are you reading poetry now?" Diep teased, stirring the pot. "Yes," Nye declared. "Poetry is for smart people." "Then read it like a smart person," Diep said. And the stove warmed their faces. For a while, the room felt like a reward. Jam simmering, pages turning, the stuffed orange pressed against Nye's ribs. Then Nye's mood shifted, small but real. She rubbed her eyes, leaned into Diep's side and whispered, "I miss my mom." The sentence didn't accuse. It simply opened a bruise. Diep didn't correct her or rush to fill the silence. She pulled Nye close until the child's breathing slowed. "You can miss someone and still be safe," Diep said softly. "I was dreaming," Nye murmured, eyes wet. "I know," Diep replied. "I'm here." She paused, choosing words that wouldn't steal anyone's place. "If it helps your heart, you can call me Mom. It doesn't replace anyone. It just gives you warmth." Nye nodded, face tucked into Diep's sweater. Me lifted his head and gave one small bark, then settled again, as if the decision made sense. That calm was still settling when a knock came. Quiet, official, inconvenient. A middle-aged man stood at the door with a folder and a polite voice. "I'm here to help with registration procedures for the workshop expansion," he said. "Comrade Than sent me." Diep's shoulders tightened for half a second. James wasn't home, so this was hers to carry. She wiped her hands and invited the man to the table where the stove's warmth reached. He opened the folder. "You expanded the peeling workshop? Added drying areas? More machines?" "We added space behind the workshop," Diep said. "A few machines. We're scaling carefully." "How many square meters?" "About 25. "How many machines in the new section?" 3. 2 planing machines and 1 support unit. "And workers?" 5, if we run full shifts." He nodded and flipped pages. "There's a new enforcement push. If higher-level inspection comes and paperwork is incomplete, it becomes trouble. Diep didn't argue. Compliance is cheaper than chaos. I understand, she said. Tell me what you need. While he reviewed, Diep kept the day moving in small circles. Jam stirred, stove fed, Nai's book open again, the stuffed orange still tucked close like a quiet anchor. The officer pointed to a section. Updated business scope, he said. Drying areas must be listed. We'll list them, Diep replied. I want everything clean. He looked up, surprised. Most people argue. Arguing doesn't change laws, Diep said gently. Preparation does. Right then, James called. Diep stepped aside and lowered her voice. How's home? He asked immediately. Warm, she said. Jam is cooking. Nai studied. She had a sad dream, but she's okay. Then she added, we have a procedure officer here about workshop registration and taxes. We expanded, so we update paperwork. James went quiet for a beat, then turned steady. Good job handling it. Don't sign anything you don't understand. Take copies. I'll review tonight. I will, Diep said. Go do your job. At the office, James's day was pressure in a suit, but he put pressure into structure. He told his team, everything external goes through one contact. No personal devices. When someone suggested a founder spotlight, he shut it down calmly. No, we deliver product and documentation. By late afternoon, the officer left a clean list of required documents. Diep took copies, aligned the pages, and clipped them beside the cooling banana bread trays. Paperwork on one side, warm food on the other, order in the middle. Then she looked at the trays and chose a small joy. We sell, she told Nai, just a little, before dark. Nai's eyes lit up. They set a small basket at the front with a simple sign, and the smell of banana bread drifted into the road. A neighbor stopped, smiled, and bought two. Thank you, Nai said carefully, as if the words mattered. When James arrived, tired and heavy-shouldered, he froze at the sight. You two are selling? He asked, half shocked, half proud. Diep lifted a bag. Warm food for a cold day, she said, and we're paying attention to paperwork. James didn't lecture. He took the basket, guided them to the car, and said, Okay, I'm taking my girls home. That night, the stove was lit again. Nai ate dinner with both hands like she had earned it. Diep laid the paperwork stack neatly on the table. James reviewed it without making it scary. One line to clarify, one document to request. The rest approved. You did this right, he said quietly. I'm trying to make things easy for you, Diep admitted. James's eyes softened. You already do. You keep the house warm while I hold the outside. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. 2 more days. No explanation, no location, just a countdown. James didn't read it twice. He slid the phone under the paperwork clip, as if order could keep the next 48 hours from tipping in their kitchen. James set the phone down and reached for Diep's hand, firm enough to mean something. We keep working, Diep whispered. And when he comes back, James replied, calm and certain, we talk clean. We don't go alone. Upstairs, Niu slept under a blanket with the stuffed orange resting by her pillow, safe enough to dream again. And outside, the cold waited for tomorrow. The message, 2 more days, stayed on James's phone, but he slid it under the paperwork clip like a sharp tool put away. The stove crackled low, banana jam cooling in jars, and the house made one quiet agreement. We keep it clean, and we don't go alone. By sunrise, the cold was back, pressing against the windows. Diep fed the stove, then lined the jam jars on a towel and labeled them in careful handwriting. Nasi sat at the table with the stuffed orange tucked against her ribs, reading while she watched the door. Because the paperwork couldn't wait, Diep pulled out the officer's checklist and built a stack. Land note, workshop sketch, machine list, worker count, tax code copy. James photographed every page and saved it into a folder titled Workshop. Day 2. No missing pieces, he said. We answer with proof. At 8:10, the procedure officer called. His voice stayed polite. Bring the updated scope form this morning and we can issue a receipt, he said. That receipt protects you if inspection comes. The early payoff landed like warm tea. Diep didn't celebrate with noise. She just breathed out and said, "We're coming." James adjusted his schedule without drama. He called Mr. Hung. "I need you at the district office for 10 minutes, he said. Witness signature on a scope update. Mr. Hung answered the way calm men answer. "I'll meet you." In the car, Diep kept the folder on her lap. Nee sat in back with the stuffed orange placed in her palm, whispering, "Safe," the way she did at the coupe. Me stayed home with James's mother, close to the stove. The district office was fluorescent and chilly. Diep handed over the documents, and James didn't speak over her. He stood beside her, steady, while Mr. Hung watched the clerk stamp the receipt and slide it across the counter. "Keep this," the officer said. "If anyone arrives, you show it first." Diep tucked the receipt into a clear sleeve. Paper became protection, just like the stove and the jam. On the way back, James's phone buzzed. His mother. "Your father called," she said. "He's returning early. Today." Before James could reply, a message flashed. "If you bring her into this, you'll regret it. Sign nothing today." Diep watched James's thumb screenshot it and drop it into the folder beside the receipt. "They're still trying to steer," James said. "Then we steer back," Diep answered. "Right now." Diep didn't ask why. She asked what mattered. "Where will he come?" she said. "To the shop," his mother replied. He said, "This is about you." James's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "Then we do the same rule," he said to Diep. "Calm truth. Witness present." He called Mr. Hung before he could second-guess it. "Can you stay with us at Hill Fruits this afternoon?" he asked. "I can," Mr. Hung said. "Keep your wife beside you." Back at Hill Fruits, Diep reset the front the way she did when she needed control. Baskets aligned, signs straight, bread bags clean. The banana bread smell still lingered in the wood, and customers kept stopping, not knowing they were walking into a day that mattered. Nai sat on her stool, drawing fruit boxes with safe stickers, orange tucked under her arm. Every few minutes she asked, "Are we steady?" Diep answered with her hands. She measured change, wrote the cold unit number, snapped a photo, and added the new receipt to the paperwork stack. "We're steady," she said. "We're prepared." At 3, a car stopped at the curb. James's father stepped out with his travel bag, shoulders rigid, eyes controlled. He didn't greet the room first. He looked at James. "Come outside," he said. "Alone." James didn't move. He glanced at Mr. Hung, then at Diep. "No," he replied, calm as a locked gate. "We talk here, respectful, with witnesses." James's father's mouth tightened. For a second, Diep thought he would turn and leave again. Then he stepped inside, set the bag down, and noticed the paperwork sleeve on the table. "You registered the expansion," he said. "We started it," Diep answered. "Receipt is here." His father nodded once. "Good." Then finally, he looked at Diep. "I spoke wrong before," he admitted. "Had I told your mother to tell James to limit meetings with you? That was fear, not truth." The room went quiet. "Fear of what?" Diep asked. His father exhaled through his nose. "Inspection," he said, "and leverage." He glanced at James. Someone told me the workshop expansion could pressure you. Tax, licensing, family image requests. I went to close an old mistake in my name so they couldn't tie it to you." "What mistake?" James asked, careful. "A debt from years ago," his father said. "A document that wasn't updated when landlines changed. I fixed it, stamped, closed." He pulled a sealed envelope from his bag and placed it on the table, unopened. Mr. Hung watched the seal, then nodded. "That's how you end a loose end," he said. James's father looked at Diep again. "You are not the problem," he said, voice rougher now. "You are the reason this house holds." Diep felt her throat tighten, but she didn't chase the moment. She just said, "Then speak directly next time." His father nodded once. "I will." James kept his tone respectful. "And the pressure?" His father shook his head. "No more secrets," he said. "Anything comes, it goes through you, and it goes in writing. No home, no children, not for bread, not for fruit, not for anybody." That sentence was justice in the language James understood. He looked at Mr. Hung. "You heard it," he said. "I heard it," Mr. Hung confirmed. Outside, the afternoon cooled, but inside Hill Fruits, the air loosened. Customers bought bread. Luan joked softly. Nai held up her drawing and announced, "Safe!" And everyone laughed, like laughter was allowed again. That night, the stove was lit. The jam jars lined up like small trophies of work, and the receipt sleeve sat on top of the paperwork stack in perfect order. James's mother served dinner and didn't rush. Me sighed by the door. Upstairs, Nai fell asleep with the stuffed orange by her pillow. At the kitchen table, James slid his father's sealed envelope into the file box and clicked the latch shut. "Clean," he said. Diep covered his hand once, warm and steady. "Clean," she echoed. And outside, the cold stayed outside.